Hello, everyone. So, although I am not here with you in the flesh, you get to have me in spirit with virtual Miss Peralta. So, you're moving on to another module, Module 8, and this is about war and expansion in the Americas. And you're going to learn about the War of 1812 mostly, but there'll be a few other things as well. So, we're going to cover Lesson 1 this week, the coming of the war. Next week, with your new teacher, you will have the War of 1812 and then settling international issues. So let's get started. First of all, the big idea for Lesson 1 is challenges at home and abroad led the United States to declare war on Great Britain. Main ideas are violations of U.S. neutrality led Congress to enact a ban on trade. Second, Native Americans, Great Britain, and the United States came into conflict in the West. And finally, the war hawks led a growing call for war with Britain. At this point, please pause the video and read If You Were There and answer the question, would you obey the law or turn to smuggling? You should have paused the video and discussed the If You Were There. Now I just want to remind you, just like when I am with you in the flesh, please make sure that you are taking notes of everything that appears on the slides, and also make sure that you make notes of anything that I emphasize as we go through our lectures. Let's get started. Main idea number 1. The United States and Great Britain settled their disputes over boundaries and control of the waterways. Remember, George Washington had encouraged the Americans to stay neutral and not get involved in politics in Europe. America is working really hard to do this, and they are working really hard to trade with all of the countries that they can. And so overseas trade was profitable, but it was very risky. For most of the merchants, the profit outweighed the risk. One of the reasons why trade was super risky is because there were pirates in the Mediterranean Sea. These were called the Barbary pirates, and they were based out of Tripoli, which is in northern Africa. And they would seize cargo ships and hold the crew for ransom. Finally, the United States was able to put a stop to this practice by sending the USS Constitution and other warships over to stop the pirates. The USS Constitution was created in 1797 when President Adams asked Congress to create a navy. Remember when President Adams was afraid that the Americans might end up going to war with France, and he asked for 30 warships to be created? One of those ships was the USS Constitution. No, I know you heard the bell, but that doesn't mean you get to leave yet. Anyways, continuing on, the USS Constitution was nicknamed Old Ironsides, and it still exists today. You can go to Boston Harbor and visit the USS Constitution. It is the longest serving warship in the United States Navy. So, in 1803, Britain and France went to war. I mean, come on. They've been at war multiple times in the time that we've covered history together. So, surprise, Britain and France are at war again. Now, this impacted the United States because the United States wanted to trade with both countries. But both countries passed laws that made it so that the United States had trouble trading with both France and Britain. Write this down. The British and the French tried to stop the United States from trading with the other country while they were at war in 1803. The British passed laws trying to tell the Americans what to do when it came to trade, and the French did the same thing. They passed laws trying to tell the Americans what to do when it came to trade. The British and French tried to stop the United States from trading with the other while they were at war in 1803. The British and the French tried to stop the United States from trading with the other country while they were at war in 1803. Both countries seized American Navy ships and merchant ships looking for supplies. Both countries, Britain and France, tried to seize merchant ships and look for supplies. Both countries, Britain and France, tried to seize American ships and look for supplies. The British also stopped American ships to search for British sailors who had ran away. And this was a bigger problem than just the laws about trade. The British stopped American ships to search for British sailors who had ran away. The British stopped American ships to search for British sailors who had run away. Now, this became a problem because sometimes Americans were captured as well. And this was a problem because sometimes Americans were captured as well. The British stopping American ships to search for British sailors who had run away was a problem because sometimes Americans were captured as well. We've talked about impressment before. Impressment is the capture of and forcing people to serve in a specific army or navy. Oftentimes the British impressed their sailors into the Navy, basically forcing them to serve in the Navy, whether they wanted to or not. And so now the British are starting to impress American soldiers into their Navy as well. Still not time for you to leave yet. Moving on. Things came to a head, and America was particularly mad when the British ship, the Leopard, stopped a U.S. Navy ship, the Chesapeake, and took sailors off of the Chesapeake by force. The big deal here is that the British were forcing the Americans to join the British Navy, and this action violated U.S. neutrality. Unacceptable. So now, when the British ship Leopard attacked the Chesapeake and violated U.S. neutrality, there were two reactions by the Americans: war or embargo. When the British violated U.S. neutrality, some Americans wanted war, but others wanted an embargo, which is a ban on trade. At this point in history, President Jefferson is the man in the White House, and he supported the Embargo Act. The Embargo Act banned trade with all foreign countries to punish both Britain and France. So the purpose of the Embargo Act was to avoid conflict with the British and French navies. The purpose of the Embargo Act was to avoid conflict with the British and French navies. The Embargo Act was to avoid conflict with the British and French navies. Basically, President Jefferson figured if the United States ships are not sailing on the ocean, they won't get attacked by the British or the French, and therefore our ships and our citizens will stay safe. Unfortunately, the people who were punished were not the British or the French. The people who were punished were American merchants who ended up losing a lot of trade because who else are they going to trade with if they're not allowed to sail on the seas? Kind of a big problem, right? I want you to take a moment to pause the video and look at the political cartoon on page 284. You guys are familiar with looking at political cartoons. So take a moment and look at this political cartoon making fun of the Embargo Act. So the Embargo Act really hurt President Jefferson. It hurt his popularity and ended up strengthening the Federalist Party. Because remember, Thomas Jefferson helped to start the Democratic-Republican Party. So the Embargo Act damaged Jefferson and strengthened the Federalists. The Embargo Act damaged Jefferson and strengthened the Federalists. Embargo Act damaged Jefferson and ended up strengthening the Federalist Party. The merchants sent hundreds of petitions to President Jefferson asking him to get rid of the Embargo Act. And unfortunately, the Embargo Act had very little effect on Britain or France. The Embargo Act had very little effect on Britain or France. The Embargo Act didn't hurt Britain and France. Instead, it hurt the American merchants. So, since the Embargo Act didn't work, Congress tried something different, and this was called the Non-Intercourse Act. This replaced the Embargo Act in 1809. So Congress replaced the unpopular Embargo Act with a new act called the Non-Intercourse Act. This act banned trade only with Britain, France, and their colonies. But let's think about this for a second. Truly, who else could America trade with? Spain, I guess, but they couldn't trade with the Caribbean islands because those islands were either held by Britain or France. They couldn't trade with India because that country was controlled by England. They couldn't trade directly with England. They couldn't trade directly with France. So the Non-Intercourse Act really wasn't much of an improvement from the Embargo Act. U.S. trade would resume with the first side to stop violating U.S. neutrality. So America told Britain and France, look, we'll begin to trade with you if you stop violating our neutrality. So bottom line, the Embargo Act didn't work, and the Non-Intercourse Act wasn't much better. There you have it. This law, the Non-Intercourse Act, was no more successful than the Embargo Act had been. But wait, America is not just having problems on the ocean with France and Britain. America is also having problems in the West, specifically with the Native Americans who were helped by Great Britain. And so then they came into conflict in the West with the United States. The situation in the West is that Native Americans in the Northwest Territory were losing land as settlers moved there. And the Treaty of Greenville didn't help because the Indian leaders had not all agreed to the treaty. And so not all of them were following the treaty because they claimed that they didn't agree to it. So then, of course, the British stepped in and they started arming the Native Americans. But wait a second, we have the Jay Treaty, so this is technically illegal. But that didn't stop Britain. So the Americans were angry and afraid, and they wanted things fixed. So British agents armed Native Americans along the western frontier, even though this was a violation of the Jay Treaty. Now, this is a name that you are going to need to know. Tecumseh. Tecumseh rose up to lead the Native Americans. Tecumseh was a Shawnee chief, and he emerged as a leader. Tecumseh, Shawnee chief, emerged as a leader. Tecumseh rose up to lead the Native Americans. He was a good leader because he was an effective communicator and he could get people to listen to them. He encouraged the Native Americans to unite, and he tried to get the Native Americans in the Northwest, the South, and the Mississippi Valley to gather together and unite to fight against the American settlers who were moving into the Northwest Territory. So Tecumseh hoped to unite the Native Americans in the northwestern frontier, the South, and the eastern Mississippi Valley. Tecumseh had his brother, who was a religious leader for the Native Americans, and they called him the Prophet. The Native Americans gathered at a location known as Prophettown or Tippecanoe. So Tecumseh and his brother founded a village near the Tippecanoe and Wassabash rivers in the Indiana Territory. The person who was most concerned about Tecumseh's actions was a man named William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison, future President of the United States of America, was the governor of the Indiana Territory. And he met with Tecumseh in 1810, and he encouraged Tecumseh to follow the Treaty of Greenville. But Tecumseh said that no single chief had the power to sell the land of the Native Americans. So Tecumseh was warned by William Henry Harrison, do not resist the power of the United States of America. Unfortunately, Tecumseh did not listen to William Henry Harrison. I would like you to pause the video again and look at the historical source on page 286 and answer the question, how did Harrison and Tecumseh's views on Western settlement differ? Please pause, read the two sources, and answer the question. Now that you've looked at Harrison and Tecumseh's views on Western settlement, let's talk about what Tecumseh did next. After meeting with Governor William Henry Harrison, he went south to try and get the Creeks to join him. When Tecumseh did that, Harrison led an army against Prophetstown. And the fighting broke out, and the Prophet ordered an attack on Harrison's camp. So William Henry Harrison attacked the village, Prophetstown, and then the Prophet, who was there, ordered the Native Americans to attack William Henry Harrison's camp. This is called the Battle of Tippecanoe, and it is significant because U.S. forces won the battle and they destroyed the idea of a Native American Confederation. And the result was that the Native Americans lost hope and Tecumseh fled to Canada. The result of the Battle of Tippecanoe was it destroyed the idea of a Native American Confederation, and Tecumseh fled to Canada. The Battle of Tippecanoe destroyed the idea of a Native American Confederation, and caused Tecumseh to flee to Canada. Last main idea, the call for war. The War Hawks led a growing call for war with Great Britain. Since it appeared that the British had supported the Native Americans in the West, many Americans were very, very upset. And this led a group of young congressmen to start calling for war against Britain. So since there was evidence of British support for Tecumseh, the Americans were mad, and this created a group called the War Hawks. Some young members of Congress from the South and the West, called the War Hawks, began demanding war against Britain. You need to know 3 important leaders of the War Hawks, and 2 of them we're going to spend some more time talking about them in later lessons. So leaders of the War Hawks were Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and Felix Grundy. Leaders of the War Hawks: Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, Felix Grundy. War Hawk leaders: Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and Felix Grundy. This group wanted the British to stop interfering with Native Americans with trade restrictions, and they wanted to invade Canada to get more land. The War Hawks wanted the British to stop interfering with the Native Americans. The War Hawks wanted trade restrictions, and they wanted to invade Canada. The War Hawks wanted to stop the British from influencing Native Americans. They wanted to invade Canada for more land, and they said that the trade restrictions hurt southern and western farmers, so they wanted those to be gone. The War Hawks used emotion to try and get the Americans to go to war. Now, of course, there were people who were against the War Hawks, and those people were mainly in New England and were mainly the Federalists. So the New England Federalists opposed the war. But why? They opposed the war because British restrictions had already hurt New England's economy, and they wanted to fix the relationship with Britain, not go to war with Britain. The people who opposed the War Hawks said that British trade restrictions had already hurt New England's economy enough, and they did not want war with Britain. The people who opposed the War Hawks said that British trade restrictions had already hurt the New England economy, and they did not want war with England. Other people said, and you should probably make a list of these things, that war with Britain was foolish. The United States wasn't ready to fight Britain. The Army and Navy were poorly equipped, and the British were able to produce more supplies for war. Yes, I will go over those 4 things again. First, other people who said that war with Britain was a bad idea. They said it was foolish. The United States wasn't ready to fight Britain. The U.S. Army and Navy were poorly equipped. And the British would be able to produce more supplies for the war. Again, the people who didn't want war with the British said that it was a foolish idea. They said the U.S. wasn't ready to fight Britain. They said the Army and Navy were poorly equipped, and that the British could produce more supplies for war. Now, this is a rhetorical question. Who do you think had the better argument? The Warhawks or the opposition? Basically, the United States was not ready for a fight. In 1808, James Madison was elected the 4th President of the United States. Following in the tradition of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson only served 2 terms and then stepped down after the end of his 2nd term, and so James Madison was elected president in 1808. Madison elected president in 1808, making him the 4th President of the United States of America. James Madison won the election in 1808. Madison was in a tough situation. He had to choose whether to continue the unpopular trade restrictions or to give in to the Warhawks. Madison said that he should not be the one to make the decision, and he actually let Congress make the decision. Because who has the right to declare war? Only Congress. Before the vote happened, though, James Madison gave a speech in Congress that blasted Great Britain's actions, which led to the Warhawks winning. And this led to James Madison being the first president at a time when Congress had declared war. So this is the first time that Congress declared war in the nation's history. Then, in the election of 1812, Madison was re-elected, and he became the first president to serve as a commander-in-chief during a wartime. All right, well, that is it. You're going to watch a couple of videos that wrap up Hamilton's story, and I have enjoyed being your teacher for these past couple of months, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the year. Both the virtual and the in-person Miss Peralta are